Chapter 11 is the last chapter that we're going to cover in this class. So it might be weird that we're doing things out of order, right? So we went from chapter 10 to chapter 12 to chapter 13 back to chapter 11. But chapter 11, I think, is one of the most bizarre, I guess, chapters. So I think it's a very good last chapter to cover. So this is all about what's called the chi-square distribution. So remember, we had our normal distribution, our student t distribution, we had our f distribution, now we have our chi-square distribution. There's a bajillion distributions out there, by the way, so if you take a upper level math course called probability theory, you study a bunch of distributions, but these are the only 4 that we need for this class. So it looks like this, it looks a lot like the f distribution. It's somewhat similar in nature, but a little bit different. So the first type of test that we'd like to do with this is going to be a test of a single variance. So we just did, with the F distribution, the test of 2 variances. So we tried to say, okay, in 2 different groups, are the variances different, or are they the same, or standard deviations also. Here, though, we're back to the one sample thing, where we're trying to say, is this something that's different than the whole population? So we have one larger group, and we're trying to pull some type of smaller group out from within that, as opposed to having 2 distinct groups where they're independent with each other. There's nothing going on between the 2. Now, one big difference that this is going to require us to do is that the calculator won't automatically calculate the p-value and test statistic for us. If you were to scroll down on your list of all of the tests when you press stat, you go to that, you're not going to find anything for this. At least most people's calculators won't. So we're going to have to do more of this by hand than we've done in other ones. So that means that obviously we'll still be doing our hypotheses because we're doing hypothesis testing. We still need to state those. But then after figuring out which test we use, if we figure out this is the test that we need to use, normally the calculator gives us the test statistic. But we're going to calculate that by hand. So we're going to have n minus 1 times s squared divided by sigma squared. So s, remember, that's the sample standard deviation. S squared, that's the sample variance. And sigma squared, that's the population variance, or just sigma by itself is the population standard deviation. So we're going to calculate this, not too hard to calculate. And then we're going to make a little note about degrees of freedom. That's n minus 1, so it's our favorite degrees of freedom. But we're also going to have to determine if we have a left, a right, or a two-tailed test. So what that means is that when we look at our distribution here, we're going to figure out, to be as extreme or more extreme, are we going to be over here? If we're over here, what this means is that we're going to have this left-tailed test. We're on the left of the 2 tail ends. Or on the other hand, if we had this wasn't shaded, this was normal, but then over here we're shading this end, well then this would be a right tail test. But on the other hand, if it's not just that region, if it's both sides, this is going to lead to a two-tailed test. And remember, we figured this out based off of the alternative hypothesis. We're looking at the alternative hypothesis and saying, is that equal or not equal, or is it greater than, or is it less than? That will help us here. And so once we put all of this together, we're going to be using a different feature within the calculator to help us figure out what are these areas. Because remember, p-values, that's the probability that you're as extreme or more extreme if you were to repeat this with another sample. So these p-values correspond to areas on these regions, so we will allow the calculator to do that for us. The calculator will calculate those regions just using a different part of the calculator.